Millionaire kid was separated from his twin. A poor girl found him, crying, and changed her life. This autumn rain fell mercilessly on the streets of downtown Chicago, turning the sidewalks into mirrors that reflected the city's neon lights. Among the bustling crowds of Michigan Avenue, a small figure sat huddled against the cold brick wall of an upscale department store. 7-year-old Alexander Whitmore, heir to a multi-million-dollar fortune, clutched a torn teddy bear to his chest, his designer clothes now soaked and dirty from hours on the street. Earlier that morning, Alexander had been with his identical twin brother, Adrian, at the annual Chicago Children's Charity Gala. The Whitmore family, known for their pharmaceutical empire, had attended the event at the Palmer House Hotel. During the chaos of photographers and social events, Alexander had wandered away from his family's security detail, following what he thought was his twin brother through the hotel's labyrinthine corridors. But it wasn't Adrian, it was another child who looked similar from behind. By the time Alexander realized his mistake, he was lost in the hotel's service areas. Panic set in as he tried to find his way back, but every corridor looked the same. In his confusion and fear, he had somehow ended up outside the hotel, and in his 7-year-old logic, he began walking in what he thought was the direction of home. Hours passed, and the familiar landmarks of his privileged world faded into the harsh reality of the city streets. Meanwhile, across town in the working-class neighborhood of Pilsen, 16-year-old Maya Rodriguez was finishing her shift at a local diner. Maya had been working part-time jobs since she was 14, helping her single mother pay rent for their small apartment above a laundromat. Her mother, Carmen, worked double shifts at a hospital as a cleaning lady, leaving Maya to manage much of their daily survival on her own. Maya had learned early that life wasn't fair. While other teenagers her age worried about prom dates and college applications, she worried about electricity bills and whether there would be enough groceries to last until her mother's next paycheck. Despite their struggles, Maya had maintained her grades and held on to dreams of becoming a social worker, someone who could help families like hers navigate the system that seemed designed to keep them down. As Maya walked home through the rain, taking her usual route through downtown to save on bus fare, she spotted the small figure pressed against the storefront. At first, she almost walked past. Chicago was full of homeless people, and she had learned, sometimes harshly, that she couldn't save everyone. But something about this child was different. His clothes, even dirty and wet, were clearly expensive. His shoes were leather, not the worn sneakers she was used to seeing on street kids. More importantly, he was crying with the kind of desperation that came from being truly lost and afraid, not the practiced sadness of someone seeking handouts. Maya's protective instincts, honed from years of looking after younger cousins and neighborhood kids, kicked in immediately. Alexander looked up as Maya approached, his blue eyes wide with fear and hope. He had been taught never to talk to strangers, but hours of being alone had worn down his caution. When Maya knelt down to his level, speaking in gentle, reassuring tones, asking if he was hurt and where his parents were, Alexander could only manage to whisper that he was lost and couldn't find his family. Maya's heart broke at the sight of this small boy, clearly out of place and terrified. Without hesitation, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She couldn't leave him on the street, especially not in this weather, and not in this part of town as night approached. She gently coaxed Alexander to come with her, promising she would help him find his family. The walk to Maya's apartment was slow and careful. Alexander, exhausted from his ordeal, could barely keep up, so Maya eventually picked him up, carrying him the last few blocks despite her own fatigue from a long day at work. She talked to him softly as they walked, trying to distract him from his fear with stories about the neighborhood, pointing out the murals on the walls and the small community garden where local families grew vegetables. When they reached the small apartment above the laundromat, Maya was relieved to find her mother already home from her first shift. Carmen Rodriguez was a woman who had seen enough hardship to recognize it in others immediately. When Maya explained the situation, Carmen didn't hesitate. She immediately began preparing a warm meal for Alexander and drew him a bath to warm him up. As Alexander sat at their small kitchen table, wrapped in one of Carmen's oversized sweaters, eating homemade pozole soup, he began to feel safe for the first time since he'd gotten lost. The apartment was tiny compared to his family's mansion in Lincoln Park, but it was filled with something his privileged world often lacked: genuine warmth and unconditional care. Maya called the police to report finding a lost child, but the system moved slowly. The officer who took the report seemed more interested in getting through his paperwork than in urgently reuniting a family. He told Maya they would need to wait until morning to process everything properly, and suggested she keep the boy overnight if she was able. That first night, Alexander slept on Maya's small couch, clutching the teddy bear that was his only connection to his old life. Maya stayed awake most of the night, checking on him and thinking about how this small boy had somehow found his way into their lives. She couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was meant to happen, though she had no idea how profoundly. It would change everything. As Alexander drifted off to sleep, he whispered a name, Adrian, and Maya realized this lost boy had a twin brother somewhere who was probably just as scared and heartbroken as he was. The next morning brought no immediate answers. The police were overwhelmed with cases, and Alexander, traumatized by his experience, could only provide limited information about his family. He knew his first name and that he had a twin brother. But in his child's understanding of the world, he couldn't remember his last name clearly or provide the kind of details that would help authorities locate his family quickly. Maya had to make a choice: go to work and leave Alexander with her mother, or stay home and potentially lose the income they desperately needed. Carmen, seeing her daughter's internal struggle, made the decision for her. She would take a sick day from her morning shift at the hospital to stay with Alexander, and Maya should go to work as planned. At the diner, Maya found it impossible to concentrate. Every few minutes, she would step outside to call her mother, checking on Alexander and hoping for news from the police. Her co-workers noticed her distraction, and when she finally explained the situation, she was surprised by their support. The diner's owner, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had run the establishment for 30 years, immediately offered to help however she could. Meanwhile, across the city, the Whitmore family was in complete chaos. Alexander's disappearance had triggered a massive search operation. Private investigators, police detectives, and FBI agents were all working around the clock. Adrian, Alexander's twin, had barely eaten or slept since his brother vanished. The two boys had never been separated for more than a few hours in their entire lives. Richard Whitmore, the boys' father and CEO of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, had mobilized every resource at his disposal. Missing person flyers with Alexander's photo were distributed throughout Chicago. News stations ran regular updates on the search. A substantial reward was offered for information leading to Alexander's safe return. But despite all these efforts, the search teams were focusing on the wrong areas. They assumed Alexander would stay close to the upscale neighborhoods he knew, never imagining that a 7-year-old could have made it across the city to a working-class area like Pils. As days passed, Maya and her mother settled into a routine with Alexander. Maya would work her shifts at the diner, often bringing Alexander with her when her mother had to work at the hospital. The regular customers at the diner began to know Alexander, and many were charmed by the polite, well-mannered boy who seemed so different from the usual kids in the neighborhood. Alexander, for his part, was experiencing a completely different world from the one he had known. In the Whitmore mansion, his every need had been anticipated by staff members. Here, he learned to help with small chores, to say please and thank you not as practiced manners, but as genuine expressions of gratitude. and to understand that food and warmth were precious things that required hard work to obtain. Maya watched as Alexander slowly began to open up. He talked about his twin brother Adrian, describing their games and shared secrets with the kind of detail that made Maya's heart ache for the family that must be desperately searching for him. She also noticed that Alexander was remarkably adaptable and kind. He never complained about the simple food or the small apartment, and he seemed genuinely grateful for every kindness shown to him. The breakthrough came during Alexander's second week with the Rodriguez family. Maya had taken him to the local library, a treat that Alexander had never experienced, since his family's private tutoring meant he'd never been to a public library. As they walked past the community bulletin board, Alexander suddenly stopped, pointing excitedly at a missing person flyer. With his own photo, Maya's hands trembled as she read the information on the flyer. Alexander Whitmore, son of Richard and Patricia Whitmore. The address listed was in Lincoln Park, one of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods. The reward amount listed was more money than Maya's family made in 5 years. That evening, Maya sat at their small kitchen table, staring at the phone number on the flyer. She knew she had to make the call, but she also knew that once she did, Alexander would return to his world, and their brief time together would become just a memory. Carmen sat beside her daughter, understanding the internal struggle without words being exchanged. Maya finally dialed the number, her heart pounding as it rang. When Richard Whitmore answered personally, he had been answering every call himself, hoping for news of his son. Maya could hear the desperation in his voice. She simply said, "I have your son. He's safe." The reunion took place the following afternoon at the Rodriguez apartment. Richard and Patricia Whitmore arrived with Adrian and a small security detail, their expensive cars looking entirely out of place on the street, lined with modest homes and small businesses. When Alexander saw his family, particularly his twin brother, the joy was overwhelming. The brothers ran to each other with a desperation that spoke to their deep bond, and for several minutes, they simply held on to each other as if they would never let go again. But as the initial emotions settled, a complex dynamic emerged. Alexander didn't want to leave immediately. Over the past 2 weeks, he had formed a genuine attachment to Maya and Carmen. He had experienced a kind of family life that was entirely different from his privileged upbringing, one based on mutual care and shared responsibility rather than wealth and status. Richard and Patricia Whitmore were overwhelmed with gratitude toward Maya and her mother. They had expected to simply collect their son and return to their lives, but they found themselves deeply moved by the obvious love and care that these strangers had shown Alexander. Maya had not only kept their son safe, but had given him something precious, an understanding of how the other half lived, and more importantly, how genuine human kindness operated without expectation of reward. The conversation that followed was awkward but meaningful. The Whitmores wanted to express their gratitude in concrete ways, but Maya was reluctant to accept what felt like payment for doing what any decent person would do. However, when Richard offered to fund Maya's college education and help her pursue her dream of becoming a social worker, she realized this was an opportunity not just for herself, but for all the family she could help in the future. As Alexander prepared to leave with his family, he made Maya promise to stay in touch. He had learned something important during his time with the Rodriguez family, that wealth wasn't what made a family rich. The love, sacrifice, and genuine care he had experienced in their small apartment had been more nourishing than anything money could buy. The story concluded with Maya visiting Alexander at the Whitmore mansion a month later. She found him changed still, the same kind boy, but now with a deeper understanding of the world beyond his privileged bubble. He had convinced his parents to establish a foundation focused on helping working families, and he insisted that Maya be involved in its operations once she finished her education. Adrian, too, had been changed by his brother's experience. Through Alexander's stories, he had gained an appreciation for their privilege and a desire to use it responsibly. The twin bond that had always connected them now included a shared mission to bridge the gap between different worlds. Maya realized that. Finding Alexander crying on that rainy street had indeed changed her life, but not in the way she had initially imagined. It wasn't the financial help that had been most transformative. It was the reminder that compassion creates connections that transcend social and economic boundaries. In helping a lost boy find his way home, she had found her own path toward a future where she could help many more families navigate the challenges she knew so well. The two families remained connected, bound by the understanding that sometimes the most profound changes in our lives come from the simplest acts of human kindness, and that real wealth is measured not in dollars, but in the love we share and the lives we touch along the way.
Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.